Tonight, a bombshell at the Oklahoma County Courthouse.
The new district attorney is asking a judge to toss out the conviction of a man who's been locked up for nearly 5 decades for a crime he swears he did not commit.
Glynn Simmons was just 21 when he was convicted and sentenced to death in 1975. That was 48 years ago. He has spent nearly 2/3 of his life in prison for the Edmond liquor store murder. He was one of 2 defendants tried together. Both were found guilty in a trial that lasted just a few days.
I was a sophomore in high school in Edmond at the time. Boy, did it shock the community. The murder happened on New Year's Eve, 1974. Simmons was convicted based on one piece of evidence, the eyewitness testimony of one woman, an 18-year-old who was shot in the face. News 4's Allie Meyer has been reporting on Glynn Simmons and his co-defendant Don Roberts since 2003.
We saw Allie in the video then, and Allie's joining us now. Allie, 20 years that you've been reporting on this, and you've talked to Simmons many times.
2 times in prison. Guys, he wrote us a letter from prison in 2003. It was 20 years ago, and in the past 20 years, we've been looking into his claims of innocence. Over the years, we have reported on 2 prosecutors, a jury foreman, a detective, a composite sketch artist, and the family of the murder victim, who all say they have serious doubts that Glynn Simmons is guilty of this crime.
The night before New Year's, 2 white women were shot by 2 black assailants with a gun. Edmond police gathered no physical evidence from the crime scene that was ever used in court, no fingerprints, no murder weapon, connecting Glynn Simmons to the scene. The murder went unsolved for months. Eventually, the Oklahoma County District Attorney charged Glynn Simmons, but the case against him was riddled with inconsistencies. Simmons had alibis who testified he was in Louisiana on the night of the liquor store murders. The old prosecutor has said the evidence against him was thin.
I had talked to her the day before she died.
The victim's own family believes Simmons is innocent.
Every day above ground is a good day.
We have interviewed Glynn Simmons in prison twice. His claims of innocence are unwavering.
I believe in the system. I've always believed it. Even when it didn't do me right, I still believed in it.
A system that gave him a public defender who was later disbarred, who did not speak up in court when prosecutors said Glynn Simmons was the trigger man.
I was born left-handed, and at 8 years old, I got my right-hand trigger finger cut off.
Back to the case. In 1975, Edmond police conducted several lineups where they asked the surviving victim, who'd been shot in the face, to identify the suspects. She picked out Glynn Simmons in the courtroom, but during those lineups, she picked others, several others.
She testified in court that he was one of the 2 men that robbed the liquor store and did the shooting. What the jury did not hear was that she misidentified or didn't identify or identified someone else 9 times prior to identifying Glynn in court.
DA Vicki Behenna now confirms that exculpatory evidence was never turned over to the defense.
There was a police report, a significant police report, that was not turned over. And so we came to the conclusion, because we believe in fair and just trials in Oklahoma, that we should file an application for requesting a new trial with the judge.
And so Friday morning, DA Behenna filed a motion to vacate Simmons' conviction. She asked for a new trial. I asked Vicki Behenna, why now, after all these years?
I'm here. I'm here. I'm deciding.
Glynn Simmons' attorney, an expert in wrongful convictions, believes with absolute certainty Glynn Simmons is innocent.
Ms. Behenna stepping in to be the district attorney in Oklahoma County is a big difference. Yeah. And that is probably the difference.
And so what's next for Glynn Simmons? Well, we've got an evidentiary hearing on Tuesday that we will be covering. Joe Norwood, who you heard from, has had that scheduled for more than a week. The press conference today was a surprise even for him. That's going to go ahead as scheduled. He does plan to present several witnesses to make the case for innocence. The judge in this case, which is Judge Amy Palumbo at the Oklahoma County Courthouse, she will decide on, make a ruling on vacating that conviction. She could also decide to grant Simmons a new trial, or she may decide not to give him a new trial in that case. She could just let him go, but either way, he is now one step closer to getting out of prison. He was incarcerated 48 years ago.
The state admitting last Friday mistakes were made, asking a judge to vacate his life sentence and give him a new trial.
Simmons' attorneys asking for today's hearing because they believe he should be free from the shackles and orange jumpsuit right there he walked into the courtroom wearing today.
News 4's Allie Meyer is at the courthouse with the very latest. Allie, you've been working on this a long time.
20 years, Jolene. Right now we're on hour 4 of testimony, and Glynn Simmons just took the stand, if you will, in his own defense. He told the court this afternoon that he was in Harvey, Louisiana, his hometown, on the night of the Edmond liquor store murders. He says he's never set foot in Edmond, Oklahoma. The court also heard from 7 alibi witnesses, as well as an expert in recognition memory testimony. And the court also heard from the former prosecutor who talked about this case, his very first death penalty case, was confirmed entirely on an eyewitness who he now says picked out multiple suspects in what he later found out was 8 or 9 different police lineups. Don Roberts called himself and Glynn Simmons fresh meat for a DA, Curtis Harris, in 1975, who he said had a reputation for pinning crimes on young black men. I just got word from inside the courtroom that Glynn Simmons is no longer on the stand. We may have been finished with testimony for now. I'm going to pop back into the courtroom. Attorneys are talking with the judge. We are waiting to hear her decision on whether or not they will toss out this 1975 murder conviction and whether Glynn Simmons will be subjected to a new trial or if he will have the opportunity to walk free.
Breaking right now, after almost 5 decades in prison for a murder he says he did not commit, Glynn Simmons is out on bond.
How's it feel to ditch that orange?
It feels good. It feels indescribable.
We have been following that case for decades.
Glynn Simmons and another man charged, convicted, and put in prison for the murder of an Edmond liquor store clerk back in the mid-70s. I was a high school student in Edmond then, and it shocked the community. Well, today, after more than 4 decades of being locked up for a murder he says he didn't commit, Glynn Simmons' conviction was vacated. He'll get a new trial and was released on bond.
A taste of freedom that may only be temporary, but is his first in 48 years. News 4's Allie Meyer has been following this case for nearly 20 of those years.
Allie, you talked to Glynn right after today's ruling, right?
Indeed, I did. Kevin, Jolene, 48 years, 5 months, 18 days. That's how long Glynn Simmons has been in prison for a crime he swears he didn't commit. He walked out of the county courthouse today, a free man.
Glynn Simmons back in court almost 50 years after he was first convicted in the Edmond liquor store murder.
Oh God, I didn't even know how to take it. I'm just shaking. I don't even know what to say. It's just unbelievable. You just like pinch me because I don't know. Yeah.
Judge Amy Palumbo ordered the shackles removed after she tossed out Simmons' murder conviction. The state admitted his 1975 murder trial was not fair.
The role of a prosecutor is to ensure a defendant's right to a fair trial. We have as much responsibility of ensuring that as the defense counsel does, and I think we fulfilled that obligation, that ethical and constitutional obligation today.
And Glynn Simmons walked out of court a free man.
How does today feel?
Indescribable. And then one I thought was never get here, kept the faith and kept working on it. But thank you, Ali.
Simmons was released on a medical bond, the conviction erased, but the murder charge remains.
The system worked right. For the first time in 48 years in Glynn's case, the system worked right.
The judge set the case for trial this fall. Glynn Simmons will fight for an acquittal if the district attorney pushes ahead.
Well, I've done 48 years in prison, so justice out the window. It's mercy, though. I don't think this is it comes around. It took a long time, but it comes around. I'm happy. No regrets. I'm happy. Trying to make something out of my life and get on with it.
And so what about that murder charge? Well, the trial is set for October. I talked to DA Vicki Bahena this afternoon. She tells me she's not sure yet whether or not her office will spend the resources it takes to take this case to trial.
Also today, we have more on the case of a convicted murderer who woke up a free man today.
For the first time in almost 50 years, Glynn Simmons, who was convicted of murder in 1975 in a trial we now know has been deemed unfair. The case has been in the headlines this year, but we've been reporting on the problems with his case for 20 years. News 4's Allie Meyer is the only journalist to interview Simmons in prison twice. Her first interview with him was 2003.
And yesterday, News 4 was the first to tell you Simmons' murder conviction and sentence were tossed out. An Oklahoma County judge ruled Glynn Simmons is now eligible for a new trial.
I want to thank you, Ali, for believing in my case.
Right.
You know, sticking with me all these years. It's been 20 years this year since we did the first interview.
20 years.
You know, and you told him yourself, you know, there's something wrong with this case. And they finally looked at it.
Jolene, this is a perfect example of how solid broadcast journalism like Allie did shines a light on something that was unfair. And that trial, the first one all those years ago, now deemed unfair. We'll see what happens next.
And journalists who are dedicated to Oklahoma, you know, a lot of people use this as a stepping stone to maybe another market. Allie is not from Oklahoma, but she's made this her home, and she's been here and is known to follow this and stay on top of it, again, for 20 years.
Like she has a lot of other cases.
Yes, yes.
So we'll see what the DA decides on a new trial, but for now, he's out of prison.
We are getting breaking news into our newsroom right now about a case we've been following for almost 50 years. Glynn Simmons was convicted and sentenced to death for the Edmond liquor store murder in 1974. In a trial in 75, we now know was unfair. Simmons was 22 years old at the time. He spent 48 years in prison. News 4 has been exclusively covering Simmons' case for 20 years now. We have done dozens of reports, 2 prison interviews with Glynn Simmons over the years. Earlier this year, we told you District Attorney Vicky Behenna admitted the 1975 prosecutor did not follow the rules, withholding exculpatory evidence at trial. Oklahoma County District Judge Amy Palumbo ruled Simmons is entitled to a new trial over the summer. Simmons was released from prison and allowed to walk free on bond, but he was still facing that 1975 murder charge. And we have just learned moments ago that the DA has decided to drop all charges against Glynn Simmons. DA Vicky Behenna has said there is simply not enough evidence to pursue the case. No physical evidence remains. The detectives are unavailable or dead. And the defense alleges other suspects were identified during the police lineups of 1975. Glynn Simmons is a free man and no longer facing that old murder charge. After nearly 50 years of defeats, this year in this courthouse, Glynn Simmons and his legal team finally won. And today, they asked a judge for a finding of actual innocence to declare that Glynn Simmons did not commit the Edmond liquor store murder of 1974.
On the night of the liquor store murder, Glynn Simmons wasn't even in the state of Oklahoma. He and a co-defendant were railroaded into a death penalty conviction in an unfair trial where the only evidence against them was the testimony of a traumatized teenager who'd been shot in the back of the head, who'd picked out several other black men in a previous police lineup. 48 years, Glynn Simmons has declared his innocence. 20 years, News 4 has been questioning his conviction. Last year, Simmons' attorney Joe Norwood asked the court to take another look.
He had 50 years stolen from him, the prime of his work life, when he could have been getting experiences, developing skills. That was taken from him by no fault of his own.
In April, the district attorney admitted Simmons' trial was unfair. In July, the judge tossed out Glynn Simmons' murder conviction.
How you feeling, Glynn?
I'm blessed.
And today, Simmons is asking that same court for a declaration of innocence.
This court has considered the evidence presented to it and defended Glynn Simmons.
From the bench, Judge Amy Palumbo read her order aloud.
The court find by clear and convincing evidence that the offense for which Mr. Simmons was convicted, sentenced, and imprisoned in this case at hand, including any lesser included offense, was not committed by Mr. Glynn Simmons.
Amen.
Thank you, Jesus.
And Glynn Simmons walked out with a legal distinction few ever receive. Actually innocent.
Yeah, this is the day we've been waiting on for a long, long time. It finally came, and we can say justice was done today, finally. And I'm happy.
A finding of actual innocence is essential for Glynn Simmons to sue
for the 48 years, 5 months, 18 days he spent behind bars for a murder he did not commit. Allie Meyer, Oklahoma's News 4.